Hey guys, welcome to RedSunStories. Hope you're doing well. Tonight, discover why men keep returning to a misty waterfall in Japan, even after learning that the beautiful woman waiting there has been spinning her deadly web for over 400 years. So, before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what time it is for you. I would love to connect with you guys. Now, let's dive into tonight's story together. The woodcutter's legs were already bound when he woke. Silk, impossibly strong, glistening in the dawn light filtering through the mist of Joran Falls, wrapped tight around his ankles, his calves. He hadn't heard her approach, hadn't felt the threads being spun. The waterfall's roar had masked everything. That eternal thunder of water against stone, the same sound that had lulled him to sleep beneath the cedar tree at the basin's edge. With trembling hands, he unwound the silk. It felt wrong against his skin, too smooth, too strong, like nothing that should exist in the natural world. Later, priests would tell him the threads could hold a full-grown man suspended over an abyss, could drag a tree from the earth roots and all, could bind a warrior so completely that even his breath became difficult. But in that moment, all he knew was the cold certainty of danger. Some instinct, divine intervention, he would later call it, made him transfer the silk to the massive tree stump beside him, the one where he'd rested his axe, the one that had stood there, solid and immovable, for longer than anyone in the village could remember. The ground shook, the stump groaned, a sound like wood screaming, like the earth itself protesting, and with a violence that sent rocks scattering and birds shrieking from their roosts, it was ripped from the ground. Roots snapped like breaking bones, soil exploded upward in a dark cloud. The stump dragged across the basin floor, gathering speed, pulled by invisible force toward the white water churning at the base of Joran Falls. It hit the surface and disappeared. No splash, no sound but the waterfall's eternal voice, as if the water had opened like a mouth and swallowed it whole. The woodcutter ran. His legs, still numb where the silk had touched them, barely carried him up the forest path away from the falls. Behind him, the mist rose from the basin like breath, like the exhalation of something vast and patient watching him flee. The morning sun couldn't penetrate that mist. It clung to the waterfall, permanent as shadow, hiding whatever lived beneath. He would warn the village. He would tell them what dwelled at Joran Falls in the Izu province of Shizuoka. He would speak of the silk that appeared without warning, of the strength that could drag ancient wood into drowning water. But he knew, with a certainty that made his chest ache, that he would return. They always returned to Joran Falls, because sometimes, when the mist parted just slightly, you could see her, the woman who shouldn't be there, the one with beauty so profound it felt like pain, like falling, like silk wrapping slowly around your will. Men had seen her for generations, sitting on the rocks beside the waterfall, her hair falling in dark waves past her waist, her robes clinging wet to her body, her eyes catching the light in a way that human eyes shouldn't. They called her the mistress of the waterfall. They called her Jorogumo. Entangling bride, whore spider. They called her death wearing the face of desire. And still, men came to the falls. Still, they woke with silk around their ankles. Still, they met her eyes across the mist and felt something fundamental shift inside them. Some barrier between survival and doom dissolving like morning dew under her golden gaze. The waterfall had stood there for thousands of years, would stand there for thousands more. Water falling eternal, mist rising eternal, And somewhere in the shadows between water and stone, she waited, patient as spiders are patient, hungry as only the transformed can be hungry, because she hadn't always been beautiful. She hadn't always been a woman at all. 400 years. That's how long it takes. How long a golden orb weaver spider must exist in this world before the transformation comes. 4 centuries of spinning webs in darkness. 4 centuries of catching insects, of molting, of hanging suspended in silk cocoons of her own making. 4 centuries of spider consciousness, if such a thing can be called consciousness, of pure instinct and hunger refined into something approaching thought. And then, when the 400th year passes, something changes. Magic awakens, the world shifts, and the spider that has lived solitary and patient for longer than most human bloodlines discovers that it can be more. It can be woman. It can be seduction. It can be doom dressed in silk robes and speaking with a voice like water over stones. The woodcutter knew none of this as he stumbled into the village, gasping, wild-eyed, telling his story to anyone who would listen. He knew only that death had reached for him at the base of Joran Falls, and only luck, or perhaps something watching over travelers, had spared him. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that sparing him had been her choice. Because she had plans for him. She always had plans, and the silk she'd wrapped around his legs while he slept had left more than physical marks. It had left a connection, a thread, invisible and unbreakable, that would pull him back to the falls, back to the mist, back to her beauty and her hunger and the doom that waited patient as stone beneath the white water. The priests would try to save him. The village would try to stop him. But silk is stronger than warnings, and 400 years teaches patience that human lifetimes cannot comprehend. She would wait. She would spin. And when he returned, and he would return, she would be there in the mist, more beautiful than memory, more dangerous than nightmare, her golden eyes reflecting the waterfall's eternal white thunder. Before she was the mistress of Joran Falls, before she learned to walk on 2 legs and speak with a human tongue, before beauty and seduction became weapons sharper than any fang, she was simply a spider, a golden orb weaver, small enough to rest in a human palm, her body painted in yellow and crimson and black by nature's careful hand. The kind of spider that spins webs of surpassing beauty, geometric perfection catching the morning light, turning dew into diamonds, silk into captured starlight. She lived in the caves near the waterfall, in the shadows where mist gathered thick and cold, in the spaces between stone and water where insects flew thick in summer, drawn by moisture and darkness and the eternal thunder that masked the sound of everything else. For years, decades, centuries, she spun her webs, caught her prey, existed in the perpetual present tense of spider consciousness, without memory, without anticipation, only the now of hunger, and the now of satiation, and the now of spinning silk that emerged from her body like breath. She was not alone in those early years. Other spiders shared the caves, though golden orb weavers live solitary lives by nature. They do not cooperate, do not communicate beyond the most basic signals. I am here. Stay away. This web is mine. Each spider in its own darkness, spinning its own isolated kingdom of silk. But gradually, over decades that meant nothing to her then, the others died. Spiders live brief lives, a year, perhaps 2 for the fortunate. They mate, they lay eggs, they die. The cycle turns quick as seasons. Only she persisted. Only her web remained, year after year, growing larger, more complex, more beautiful in its terrible perfection. If she had thoughts in those centuries, They were spider thoughts. Silk is here, prey is there, danger approaches, retreat, attack, feed, spin, wait. The thoughts of instinct, not consciousness. Pure hunger refined into elegant form. Humans sometimes came to the waterfall. Even then, before her transformation, before her legend grew like silk accumulating strand by strand. They came to admire the beauty of Joran Falls, the way water plunged 50 meters down rock face, worn smooth by millennia of falling. They came to gather herbs that grew in the mist-watered soil. They came to seek spiritual cleansing in the waterfall's eternal roar. She paid them no attention. They were too large to catch, too dangerous. Spider instinct said, avoid, retreat, hide. But she watched them. From the shadows of her cave, from the center of her web where vibrations told her everything that touched her silk. She watched them move on two legs, speak with sounds that meant something beyond spider warnings, touch each other with gentleness that her kind never knew. Did she wonder, in whatever way a spider can wonder, what it meant to be them instead of her? Probably not. Not then. Not yet. The transformation when it came in her 400th year was not gentle. Imagine 4 centuries of existence as pure instinct, pure hunger, pure simplicity. And then, like water breaching a dam, consciousness floods in. Suddenly there is not just now, but then, and when, and why. Suddenly the web is not just web, but symbol, territory, creation, art. Suddenly hunger is not just hunger, but desire, craving, the aching awareness of want. And suddenly, most terrifying of all, there is self. The understanding, I am, I exist. I have existed for 400 years, and I will continue to exist, and I am alone. The loneliness must have been unbearable. 400 years of solitary existence, suddenly understood. 400 years without touch, without communication, without anything beyond the brief vibrations of prey struggling in silk. The weight of all those centuries pressing down on new consciousness like stone, like water, like the roar of Joran Falls that suddenly meant not just sound but eternity, isolation, the vast indifference of time. But with consciousness came power. The magic that awakens in a spider after 4 centuries of life is old magic, yokai magic, the kind that transforms and transcends and transgresses the boundaries between species. She grew, not just in awareness but in physical form. Her body swelled beyond natural spider size, reaching proportions that could frighten even the bravest man. Large enough to catch not insects, but birds, even small animals that strayed too close to her web. And she learned to shapeshift. The first time she became human must have been instinctive, like a spider molting without conscious thought. One moment 8 legs, the next 2. One moment multiple eyes seeing the world in fractured spider vision, the next 2 eyes that saw depth and color and beauty in ways spider eyes cannot comprehend. One moment, spider alone in cave, the next woman standing at the base of Joran Falls, feeling mist on skin she'd never had before, hearing the waterfall with ears that understood not just vibration but sound, meaning music. Did she look at her reflection in the waterfall basin and understand that she was beautiful? Did she recognize that the face she wore, young, flawless, with eyes that caught light like jewels and hair that fell like black silk, was exactly the kind of face that would draw humans close? Or was beauty simply another web, another tool of predation that 400 years of hunting had refined into human form? Because with consciousness and power came a new kind of hunger. Insects were no longer sufficient. Birds, animals, these satisfied for a while. But something fundamental had shifted. She had awareness now, loneliness now. And loneliness demands not just food, but connection, even if that connection is predation. She wanted human prey, not just for sustenance, though their life force was richer, more satisfying than anything she'd consumed before, but for the company, however brief, for the sound of a human voice before she drained it to silence, for the warmth of human skin before it grew cold in her embrace, for the brief illusion that she was not alone, not monster, not abomination, just a woman meeting a man by a waterfall, even if that meeting always ended in silk and drowning. The first man who came to her did not know what she was. How could he? She sat on the rocks beside the waterfall looking like exactly what he'd been hoping to find. A beautiful woman alone, vulnerable, mysterious. He approached with words of greeting, perhaps offers of help. She watched him with eyes that had studied prey for 4 centuries and smiled. She still remembers how easily the silk came, how her human hands could spin threads just as her spider legs had done, invisible in daylight, impossibly strong. How she'd wrapped him so gently he thought it was affection, not binding. How his strength had faded day by day as her venom worked slow and sweet through his blood. How he'd thanked her, even at the end, for her company. How she'd pulled him into the waterfall basin and felt the loneliness recede for a brief, shining moment before returning worse than before. After the first came the second. After the second, the third. Each one different. Different face, different voice, different way of dying. But each one the same in the essential way. Each one drawn by her beauty. Each one caught in her web. Each one drowned in Joran Falls. And with each one, she learned how humans thought, how they desired, how they loved and feared and rationalized and deceived themselves. Learned that loneliness was not hers alone, that humans too came to waterfalls seeking something they could not name. Learned that the line between seduction and predation was thinner than spider silk and just as strong. Over decades, over generations of human lives, she perfected her hunting. The exact smile to wear, the precise tone of voice that sounded like promise instead of threat, the way to touch that felt like affection but left silk threads invisible on skin. She became the Jorogumo, the entangling bride, the mistress of Joran Falls. Legend walking on 2 legs, nightmare wearing beauty's face. The waterfall's permanent resident, patient as stone, hungry as only the transformed can be hungry, and still, beneath the human form, she was spider. Still solitary by nature, still driven by instincts 400 years old, still alone in ways that consciousness had made unbearable. The waterfall kept falling, the mist kept rising, and she kept waiting in the shadows between water and stone, neither fully monster nor fully woman, sustained by prey, but starving for something she could no longer name. 3 days after the silk bound his legs, 3 days after the tree stump was dragged screaming into Joran Falls, 3 days after he'd run gasping and wild-eyed to warn the village, the woodcutter returned to the waterfall. He told himself he needed to retrieve his axe, that he'd dropped it in his panic, and good axes were expensive, and surely by daylight the falls would be safe. These were the lies he told himself as he walked the forest path, as the sound of falling water grew louder, as the mist began to gather cool against his skin. But the truth he wouldn't admit even to himself, was that he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd glimpsed in the moment before he'd run. A woman, standing in the mist, watching him flee. He'd seen her for only a moment, a flash of dark hair, pale skin, eyes that caught the morning light wrong. But that moment had burned itself into his mind like a brand, like silk threads wrapping around his thoughts. pulling him back despite every rational warning screaming in his skull. The basin at the base of Joran Falls looked peaceful in afternoon light. Water crashed down from 50 meters above, sending up spray that caught the sun in rainbow fragments. Moss grew thick on the surrounding rocks, emerald and soft. Birds sang in the cedar trees. It looked like exactly what it was, a beautiful, sacred place where people came to feel the presence of something larger than themselves. His axe lay exactly where he'd left it, propped against the stone where the tree stump used to be. The ground where the stump had been torn free was torn and raw, roots and soil scattered like evidence of violence, but otherwise, everything seemed normal, safe, mundane. "You came back." The voice came from behind him, soft, feminine, carrying clearly over the waterfall's roar. He spun, heart suddenly hammering, and there she was. She sat on a rock at the basin's edge, her feet dangling in the water. Young, perhaps 20, perhaps ageless, with the kind of beauty that made the breath catch. Her robes clung wet to her body, dark fabric against pale skin. Her hair fell past her waist in waves that looked like spilled ink, like midnight, like something too perfect to be entirely human. But it was her eyes that held him, gold-flecked, enormous, catching the light in ways that reminded him of something. What? Something important he should remember. Spider eyes. Multiple spider eyes reflecting sun. But that thought came and went so quickly, he wasn't certain he'd thought it at all. His voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. "I came for my axe." She smiled. Not the coy smile of a young village woman, but something else. Something that held knowledge and patience, and a hunger he couldn't quite identify. "Did you?" The question hung in the mist-heavy air. He should leave. He knew he should leave. Every instinct screamed danger. This woman alone at the falls, this woman who appeared from nowhere, this woman who smiled like something wearing human expression without quite understanding what it meant. But he didn't leave. Couldn't leave. Because she was beautiful, yes, but more than beautiful. She was fascinating in the way fire is fascinating, in the way falling is fascinating, in the way doom itself can be fascinating when it wears the right face. "Who are you?" he asked. "Who do you think I am?" She replied, still smiling. "A villager," he wanted to say. "A traveler. Someone ordinary who happened to be washing her feet in the waterfall basin." But the words wouldn't come, because even thinking them felt like lies. "You're the mistress of the waterfall," he said instead, and was shocked to hear the words emerge from his own mouth. "The Jorogumo." Her smile widened, showed teeth that were perhaps slightly too sharp, too many. "Clever man, and yet you came anyway." "I needed my axe." "Liar." But she said it with something almost like affection. She stood, water streaming from her robes, and walked toward him. Her movements were liquid, graceful in ways that reminded him of silk unfurling, of webs swaying in breeze. "You came because I called you." I didn't hear." "Not with your ears." She stopped close enough that he could feel the cold radiating from her skin, could smell water and silk and something else, something sweet and wrong that made his head swim. "The silk I wrapped around your legs left marks, Woodcutter, left threads connecting you to me. I've been pulling them, slowly, gently, and here you are." He should run, should grab his axe and flee back to the village and never return to Joran Falls, should warn everyone, should demand the priests come with sutras and sacred fire to drive this creature away. Instead, he stayed rooted to the spot as she circled him slowly. Her eyes, those golden, impossible eyes, taking in every detail. You're afraid, she observed. Good. Fear is wise, but you're also curious, also lonely, also hungry for something you can't name. I'm not. Everyone who comes here is lonely. She stopped in front of him again, so close now that he could see the waterfall reflected in her eyes, as if her eyes were themselves pools of water, windows to drowning. That's why I chose this place 400 years ago. The waterfall draws them. The isolated seek isolation. The lost seek lostness. And I, her voice dropped to barely a whisper, I seek company, however briefly. 400 years. The words registered slowly, impossibly. You're a spider. I was a spider. She reached up and touched his face with fingers that felt cool and smooth and somehow wrong, as if skin was a costume she wore over something else entirely. Now, I'm whatever I choose to be. Usually, I choose to be beautiful. It makes the hunting easier. You're going to kill me. It wasn't a question. Eventually, she smiled that almost right smile again. But not today. Today I'm simply going to let you look at me, let you hear my voice, let you feel these threads pull a little tighter. Her fingers traced down his jaw, his neck, his chest, and where she touched, he felt it now. The invisible silk wrapping around him, binding him to her with connections that had nothing to do with rope or chain. Why? The word came out desperate. Why tell me? Why not just do whatever you're going to do? For the first time, her smile faded. Her expression became something complicated. Lonely, yes, but also frustrated, confused, almost human in its sadness. Because I've learned something in 400 years of hunting, she said quietly. The prey that comes willingly tastes sweeter. The prey that understands what I am, what I'm doing, what doom awaits. Those are the ones whose life force sustains me longest. Fear is delicious, but acceptance is ambrosia. She stepped back, releasing him from her touch, from the spell of her proximity. So go home, Woodcutter. Go back to your village, to your ordinary life. Think about what I am. Think about the danger. Think about how you should never, ever return to Joran Falls. She walked toward the waterfall, toward the mist that seemed to gather around her like living shadow. And then, she called over her shoulder, her voice carrying impossible clear over the water's roar. Come back anyway, because you will. The silk sees to that. The hunger sees to that. And I'll be waiting. She stepped into the mist and vanished. No ripple in the water. No sound but the falls. Just gone, as if she'd never been there at all. The woodcutter stood frozen for a long moment, his heart hammering, his skin still cold where she'd touched him. Then, with shaking hands, he picked up his axe. He walked home quickly, not running. Running would be admitting the fear, but moving fast enough that he reached the village before sunset. He said nothing to anyone about what had happened. How could he? What could he possibly say that wouldn't sound like madness? That night, he dreamed of golden eyes, of silk wrapping around his body, gentle as a lover's embrace, of water closing over his head, cold and final and somehow impossibly welcoming. When he woke, his legs felt weak, his appetite had vanished, and all he could think about was the waterfall, the mist, and the woman waiting there with hunger in her eyes and silk in her hands. He returned the next day, and the next, and the next. Each visit, he told himself it would be the last. Each time he walked the forest path to Joran Falls, he swore he was only going to tell her no, to break whatever connection she'd created, to reclaim his will and his life and walk away free. But when he arrived and found her waiting, always exactly where the mist gathered thickest. The words died in his throat, and instead of leaving, he sat beside her on the rocks and listened to her speak. She told him about her transformation, about the 4 centuries she'd spent as a spider, living in pure instinct without thought or awareness, about the moment when consciousness had flooded her like water breaching a dam, bringing with it the terrible weight of self, of memory, of understanding that she had been alone for 400 years and would be alone forever. "Imagine it," she said, her golden eyes fixed on the waterfall as if watching something he couldn't see. 400 years of existence suddenly remembered all at once. Every web I ever spun, every prey I ever caught, every moment of solitude, all of it crashing down on me in a single instant of awareness. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw something that might have been pain, might have been loneliness, might have been a plea for understanding that something like her should never be able to articulate. It nearly destroyed me. The loneliness. The hunger wasn't just for food anymore. It was for connection, for touch, for the sound of a voice that wasn't mine. Even if that connection lasted only hours before I had to feed. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, though part of him already knew. "Because you asked who I am." She smiled, sad and strange. "And because you'll understand, soon enough, what it means to want something so badly that you'll accept any doom to have it." She was right. With each visit, he grew weaker. The change was subtle at first, a slight fatigue, a loss of appetite, a pallor to his skin that his wife noticed with concern. But as days turned to weeks, the deterioration became impossible to hide. His strength faded. His hands trembled when he tried to work. He grew thin, hollow-eyed, pale as death. The village whispered. Some said he had a wasting illness. Others, more superstitious, spoke of curse and yokai and the danger of Joran Falls. His wife begged him to see the Buddhist priests at the temple. His friends urged him to rest, to eat, to stop whatever was consuming him from within. But he couldn't stop, wouldn't stop, because being with her, despite the weakness, despite the growing certainty of doom, felt more real than anything else in his life. When he sat beside her at the waterfall, when he listened to her speak of centuries and transformation and hunger, when her cold fingers touched his face with something that might almost be tenderness, in those moments, he felt seen in ways he'd never been seen before. She understood loneliness. She understood the hunger for connection so powerful it transcends reason, safety, even survival. She understood what it meant to want something impossible and pursue it anyway, knowing the price but unable to calculate its weight. "You're killing me," he told her one afternoon, the words calm despite their weight. "I know." She didn't look at him, kept her eyes on the waterfall. "My venom works slowly. It's in your blood now, weakening you day by day. Soon you'll be too frail to make the walk here. And then you'll finish it. Yes." Her voice was barely audible over the water's roar. "Unless you stop coming." They both knew he wouldn't stop. "Do you feel anything?" he asked. The question had been building in him for weeks. The need to know if this was purely predation, or if somewhere in her transformed heart she felt something beyond hunger. For me? For any of them? She was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "I don't know." Her fingers traced patterns on the wet rock beside her, and he realized with a start that she was unconsciously mimicking the motion of spinning silk. 400 years as a spider didn't teach me emotion, only instinct. And then suddenly, I had consciousness without the framework to understand what consciousness means. I learned to imitate human feeling, learned what words to say, what expressions to wear. But whether I actually feel or just perform feelings so perfectly, I can't tell the difference anymore. She looked at him, and her eyes held something he couldn't name. Does it matter? Yes, he said, surprised by his own certainty. It matters. Why? Because if you feel nothing, then I'm just food. But if you feel something, even a fraction of what I feel, then maybe this is... He struggled for words. Maybe this is real. She laughed, but there was no joy in it. Real? What's real? The spider I was for 4 centuries? The woman I became? The hunger that drives me to drain life from beautiful men? The loneliness that makes me crave their company even as I kill them? She turned to face him fully, and in the afternoon light, her eyes looked more gold than ever, more inhuman, more terrible and beautiful. You're dying for something that might be nothing more than a spider wearing a woman's face, speaking words it learned by rote. Is that real enough for you? Yes, he said simply, and meant it, because real or not, feeling or performance, he had never been so thoroughly seen, so completely understood, so absolutely accepted, weakness, fear, doom, and all, as he was in her presence. The village had roles for him: husband, woodcutter, son, neighbor. His life had expectations, duties, the grinding normalcy of existence lived according to other people's patterns. But here, at Joran Falls, with a 400-year-old spider wearing a woman's form, here he could be simply himself. Lonely, hungry, seeking something unnamed, willing to die for a connection that might be nothing more than predation dressed as intimacy. Wasn't that, in its own terrible way, a kind of truth? The waterfall kept falling, the mist kept rising, and day by day, visit by visit, he grew weaker, while the silk threads binding him to her grew stronger, until the day the Buddhist priest came looking for him. The priest found him at the waterfall on a gray morning, when the mist hung so thick it turned the world ghostly, indistinct, like a dream half remembered. The woodcutter sat on the rocks beside her, beside the Jorogumo, the mistress of the falls, the beautiful death, and didn't hear the priest's approach over the water's eternal thunder. But she heard. Her head snapped up, those golden eyes fixing on the path with predator's focus. "You brought company," she said, and her voice held something new. Not fear, exactly, but wariness, the alertness of a creature that knows when its hunting has been discovered. "I didn't," the woodcutter began, but then he saw the priest emerging from the mist, staff in hand, prayer beads wrapped around his wrist, his face set in lines of grim determination. "Step away from her," the priest commanded, his voice carrying surprising authority for an old man. "She is not human. She is Jorogumo, the entangling bride, the spider that has lived 400 years and feeds on human life. Step away before she binds you further." The woodcutter didn't move. Couldn't move. The threads holding him to her, invisible, unbreakable, felt stronger than any physical binding. "I know what she is," he said quietly. "Then you know you're dying." The priest descended the path carefully, keeping his eyes on the woman who wasn't a woman. "Your wife came to the temple weeping, said you've grown pale, weak, that you refuse food and spend all your hours away from home. She begged me to help you." His gaze sharpened. "I have seen yokai possession before. I know the signs, and when I asked where you've been spending your days, she hasn't possessed me," the woodcutter protested. "I came willingly." "Willingly?" The priest's voice held disbelief. Look at yourself, man. You're wasting away. Whatever spell she's woven around your mind, she's killing me. The woodcutter interrupted. I know, but it's not possession. He struggled for words. It's choice. The Jorogumo had stood while they spoke, her body tense, her eyes never leaving the priest. Now she moved, not toward the priest, but toward the waterfall, putting herself between the men and the basin. Escape route clear. Choice, the priest repeated, and his voice softened with something like pity. Tell me, woodcutter, do you love her? The question hung in the mist-thick air. The woodcutter opened his mouth to answer, to say yes or no or I don't know. And silk shot from the Jorogumo's hands like liquid light, like captured moonbeam, impossibly fast. It wrapped around the woodcutter's chest, his arms, binding him before he could move. The priest shouted, raising his staff, beginning a sutra in the old tongue. But more silk came, catching the priest's robes, his arms, pulling them both toward the waterfall with strength that no human woman could possess. Run, the Jorogumo said, and for the first time the woodcutter heard real emotion in her voice. Panic, perhaps, or something older and more desperate. I can't stop myself. The priest threatens me, threatens our... She caught herself. The silk is defensive. It acts without thought. Run. But the priest had begun his sutra properly now, the ancient words carrying power that made the air itself seem to shimmer. The silk binding the woodcutter loosened, fell away like morning dew dissolving. The threads holding the priest snapped. The Jorogumo shrieked, a sound nothing like human voice, something between spider's hiss and woman's scream, and leaped backward. Her form flickered, unstable, human shape blurring into something else. For just a moment, the woodcutter saw her true self, massive spider body, golden and terrible, legs like jointed shadows, eyes, so many eyes, reflecting light like drops of liquid amber. Then she was woman again, but woman pressed against the rocks, cornered, beautiful face twisted with something that might have been fear or fury or both. Leave. She spat, speaking to the priest but looking at the woodcutter. Leave this place. I will not be driven from my home by prayer and righteousness. Her voice dropped. And you? Now she looked only at the woodcutter, and in her eyes he saw something complex, anguished, perhaps even genuine. You should go. Live. Find someone who can give you more than slow death wrapped in pretty words. I don't want someone else, he said, and was shocked to hear the words emerge steady, certain. I want you. I'm a spider. Her voice broke on the word. 400 years of hunting, and you're the first who's made me wish I were anything else. The priest grabbed the woodcutter's arm, pulling him toward the path. Come, now, before her control returns. The woodcutter let himself be pulled, let the priest drag him up the path, away from the waterfall, away from her. But he looked back, watched her standing in the mist growing smaller, more alone, more lost than anything 400 years old should be able to look. She's Yokai, the priest said as they walked, his voice urgent, concerned. She preys on humans. Whatever you feel, it's not real. It's the product of her venom, her magic, her 4 centuries of learning how to manipulate prey. Maybe, the woodcutter agreed. But what if it is real? What if she doesn't know herself whether it's real? What if after 400 years alone, she's finally felt something that transcends hunger, and I'm walking away from it? The priest was silent for a long time. Then, even if it's real, she will kill you. That is her nature. That is what transformation made her. I know, the woodcutter said quietly. They reached the village as the sun broke through clouds, turning the world ordinary again, safe again. The woodcutter's wife wept with relief when she saw him. His friends welcomed him back. The priest performed rituals of cleansing, of protection, of severing supernatural bonds. And for 3 days, the woodcutter stayed in the village, ate the food his wife prepared, worked in his workshop, slept in his own bed, pretended everything was normal. But at night, he dreamed of golden eyes, of silk wrapping gently around his body, of a voice saying, "You're the first who's made me wish I were anything else." And he felt the threads still there, invisible, unbroken despite the priest's rituals. Threads connecting him to her, to the waterfall, to doom wearing beauty's face and loneliness in her eyes. On the 4th day, he made his decision. The Tengu lived high on the mountain above Joren Falls, in the places where cedar trees gave way to bare stone and clouds gathered like thoughts. They were ancient beings, older than the Jorogumo's 400 years, older than the waterfall itself, perhaps. Guardians of mountains and forests, protectors of the natural order, beings who had seen empires rise and fall and understood the deep patterns beneath chaos. The woodcutter climbed for 2 days to reach their territory. His body was weak from the Jorogumo's venom, made weaker by the steep ascent, but determination pushed him upward. He had to try this, had to ask permission, had to know if what he felt, what she might feel, could be legitimate, blessed, real. Because if the Tengu gave permission for him to marry her, then perhaps she was more than monster. Perhaps transformation could transcend nature. Perhaps even a spider who'd lived 4 centuries could learn to love. He found the Tengu at a shrine carved into living rock, ancient beyond reckoning. 3 of them waited there, tall figures with human bodies and long beaked noses, eyes that held centuries of knowledge, robes that moved in wind that touched nothing else. They watched him approach with expressions that held neither malice nor welcome, only patient observation. "We know why you've come," the eldest said, its voice like wind through distant trees. "The Jorogumo of Joren Falls. You seek our blessing to join with her." The woodcutter bowed deeply. "I do. I know what she is. I know the danger. But I believe..." His voice caught. "I believe she feels something real for me, and I know I feel something real for her. If you would grant permission..." "No." The word fell like stone. Absolute. Final. "Please," the woodcutter begged, still bowing. "At least tell me why. At least let me understand." The Tengu regarded him with something that might have been pity. "We do not refuse from cruelty," the eldest said. "We refuse because we understand nature in ways humans cannot. Sit. We will explain, though the explanation will not comfort you." The woodcutter sat on the cold stone, his weak body grateful for the rest. The 3 Tengu arranged themselves around him, and when the eldest spoke, its voice carried the weight of eons. "The Jorogumo was spider for 400 years," it began. 4 centuries of pure instinct. Hunt, feed, spin, wait. No love, no compassion, no connection beyond the momentary vibration of prey caught in web. That is spider nature. It is not cruel. It is not evil. It simply is. The 2nd Tengu took up the thread. When transformation came, it did not erase those 400 years. It added to them. Consciousness layered over instinct. The capacity for thought placed atop foundation of hunger. She learned to speak human words, wear human form, perhaps even desire human connection. But beneath, she is still predator, the 3rd Tengu finished. Still driven by hunger that has been refined but not eliminated. Still solitary by nature, incapable of the sustained connection that true partnership requires. She is yokai, beautiful, powerful, tragic in her way. But she is not human, cannot become human, and the gulf between her nature and yours is not one that love can bridge. But she said, the woodcutter's voice broke. She said I was the first who made her wish she were anything else. Doesn't that mean something? It means she is lonely, the eldest said gently. 400 years of solitude suddenly understood. Of course she wishes to be different. Of course she craves connection. But wishing does not transform nature. We have watched her for decades since her transformation, have seen her prey come and go. Each one she draws close. Each one she drains and drowns. Some she mourns in her fashion. But always the hunger returns. Always the solitude reasserts. She cannot help what she is any more than the waterfall can help falling. Then what am I supposed to do? The woodcutter's voice was raw with desperation. Just walk away? Pretend I never met her? Live the rest of my life knowing there's someone, something, that understands me better than anyone else ever will, and I have to abandon her to eternal loneliness because her nature is wrong? The Tengu were silent for a long moment. Then the second spoke, its voice heavy with sorrow. There is another option, the option she offers all who come to her, consciously or not. Death, the woodcutter said flatly, union in the only way her nature permits. The Tengu's eyes held infinite sadness. She will wrap you in silk, will drain your life slowly, savoring it, mourning it, perhaps even loving you in whatever way she can understand love. You will die knowing you were seen, understood, accepted entirely. It is the only genuine connection she can offer. And perhaps in dying, you will give her something she has never had, the memory of someone who came to her knowing fully what she was and choosing her anyway. That's monstrous, the woodcutter whispered. Yes, the eldest agreed. But it is also the only truth available. We cannot bless your union because we cannot bless predation. We cannot sanction death as love. We cannot pretend that nature can be overwritten by desire, no matter how genuine that desire may be. The third Tengu leaned forward, its ancient eyes locking with the woodcutter's. Go home, recover your strength, live your human life with your human wife. Let the Jorogumo return to solitude. It is her natural state, painful though consciousness has made it. This is the only wisdom we can offer. But the woodcutter was shaking his head before the Tengu finished speaking. I can't. The threads. She said she wrapped silk around me. Invisible connections I can't break. Every day I'm away from her, they pull tighter. I dream of her every night. I think of her every moment. My wife's face has become a stranger's. My life has become a cage. He looked up at the Tengu, eyes bright with something between madness and clarity. I'm already dying. The priest's rituals didn't stop her venom. And even if they had, even if I could live decades more, what kind of life would it be, knowing what I'm missing, what I'm condemning her to? Then, you've already chosen, the eldest said quietly. I have, the woodcutter agreed. I just hoped. I hoped you could make it right somehow. Make it blessed instead of doomed. Make it love instead of predation. Some things, the second Tengu said softly, are both. The woodcutter stood, his legs trembling with exhaustion and decision. He bowed one final time to the Tengu. Thank you for your honesty, he said. I wish it could have been different. As do we, the eldest replied. Go with what peace you can find, and know that we understand, even if we cannot approve. The descent from the mountain was faster than the climb. The woodcutter's feet found the path by instinct, his body moving while his mind raced ahead, already at the waterfall, already in her arms, already wrapped in silk and sinking beneath white water. The village came into view as sunset painted the sky gold, the same gold as her eyes. He didn't stop, didn't say goodbye to his wife, didn't pause at his workshop or his home or any of the places that had defined his ordinary life. He walked straight through the village and onto the forest path, toward the sound of falling water, toward the mist gathering in twilight shadow, toward the doom he'd chosen with eyes open and heart certain. Behind him, someone called his name. His wife, perhaps, or a friend who'd spotted him passing. But the voice was already distant, already belonging to a world he was leaving. Ahead, the waterfall's roar grew louder. The mist grew thicker, and somewhere in that mist, he knew, she waited, patient as spiders are patient, hungry as only the transformed can be hungry, lonely as 400 years of solitude and the brief, aching hope of connection had made her. The threads pulled him forward, and he went willingly into the gathering dark. She was standing in the basin when he arrived, exactly where he'd known she would be. The twilight turned her into something between real and vision, a figure half-formed from mist and falling water, neither fully solid nor fully spirit. Her robes clung wet to her body, her hair moved in wind he couldn't feel, and her eyes, those impossible gold eyes, reflected the last light like captured stars. "You came back," she said, and her voice held neither surprise nor triumph, only a terrible, resigned sadness. "The priest didn't stop you. The rituals didn't work." "They worked," the woodcutter replied, stopping at the basin's edge. "I'm here anyway." She closed her eyes. "I asked the Tengu for their blessing." A tremor ran through her body. When she opened her eyes again, they glittered with something that might have been tears, if spiders could cry. "What did they say?" "They said no," he answered simply. "They said your nature is predator and mine is prey, and no amount of desire can bridge that gulf. They said you'll kill me because that's what you are, and I should go home and live my human life." They were right. Her voice was barely audible over the waterfall's roar. "You should go, while you still can, while there's still enough strength in your legs to carry you away." "I don't want to go," he said. "I'll kill you." The words came out ragged, desperate. "I can't help it. It's what I am. 400 years a spider, and consciousness didn't change the fundamental hunger. Already my venom is in your blood. Already you're dying. If you stay, if you let me touch you again, it will accelerate. Days, maybe hours. And then you'll wrap me in silk and pull me into the water," he finished for her. "I know." "Then why are you here?" she demanded. And now her voice held anguish, confusion, the sound of something that had spent 4 centuries hunting and had never before encountered prey that understood and chose doom anyway. "Why would you choose this?" He walked into the basin, cold water soaking his legs, and stopped in front of her. Close enough to see that her beauty wasn't perfect. There were subtle wrongnesses in the arrangement of her features, the way her skin caught light, small tells that screamed other, non-human predator, wearing borrowed form. But also close enough to see the loneliness in her eyes, the desperate hope struggling against 400 years of solitude, the aching, uncertain desire to be more than hunger. "Because in my whole life," he said quietly, "I have never been so completely seen, never been so thoroughly understood. My wife loves a version of me, the good husband, the reliable worker, the man who fits his role. My friends know a version of me, the companion, the helper, the one who doesn't burden them with dark thoughts. But you... He reached up and touched her face, felt the cold smoothness of her skin, the wrongness and rightness of her. You see all of me. The loneliness, the hunger for something I can't name, the willingness to choose doom over ordinary life. You see me, and you don't ask me to be different. I see prey, she whispered, but without conviction. Maybe, he agreed, but maybe you see more than that. Maybe you see someone as lonely as you are, someone as hungry for connection, someone willing to meet you in the only place your nature permits, in death that looks like embrace, in doom that feels like love. It's not love, she said, but her voice broke on the word. I don't know if I can love. Don't know if 400 years as spider left room for anything except hunger wearing love's mask. Then let it be hunger, he said, and pulled her close. Let it be predation. Let it be nature playing out the only way nature can. But let it also be this: two lonely creatures finding each other across the gulf between species, between human and yokai, between life and death. Let it be the only connection you can offer, and the only connection I want. She shuddered in his arms. I don't want to be alone anymore, she confessed, the words muffled against his chest. 400 years of solitude, and consciousness made it unbearable. Every victim I've taken, I've hoped, foolishly, that they could fill the emptiness. But they die, and I remain, and the loneliness returns worse than before. You're the first who's made me understand that the hunger isn't just for life force, it's for this, for being held, for being seen as something more than monster. Then let me give you that, he whispered into her hair, even if it's only for hours, even if it ends in drowning. Let me be the one who stays willingly. Let me be the memory that proves you're capable of connection, even if your nature demands it end in death. She pulled back to look at him, and in the dying light, her eyes were liquid gold, shimmering with emotion that 400 years hadn't taught her how to express. It will hurt, she warned. My venom, it's already weakened you, but the final dose, it will feel like fire in your veins before the numbness comes. And the silk, her voice caught. The silk will bind you so completely you won't be able to move, to breathe properly. You'll feel yourself drowning slowly as I pull you under. I know, he said. And you still choose this? I choose you, he corrected, whatever that means, however you can receive it. She made a sound between sob and laugh. Then she kissed him, and her mouth was cold, wrong, tasting of water and silk, and something ancient that human lips should never taste. But it was also gentle, hesitant, as if she'd learned the motion by observation, but never understood its meaning until this moment. When she pulled away, silk came with her, thin strands, gossamer light, emerging from her hands, her hair, her body itself. They wrapped around him slowly, deliberately, and he felt their strength, far stronger than any natural fiber, stronger than iron, unbreakable as the connection that had drawn him back to her again and again. I'm sorry, she whispered as the silk crossed his chest, his arms, binding them gently to his sides. I'm sorry I can't be different. Can't offer you life instead of death. Can't love you the way humans love. Maybe you love the way Jorogumo love, he said, his voice already growing weaker as her venom worked through his system. Maybe this is what love looks like after 400 years as a spider. Honest, inevitable, doom and devotion inseparable. More silk came, wrapping his legs, his torso, cocooning him in strands that caught the last light like captured starlight. He could feel his strength fading, feel his breath growing shallow, feel the waterfall's cold spray mixing with the silk's strange warmth. She held him as the silk worked, supported his weight as his legs gave out, whispered words in a language that might have been ancient Japanese or might have been spider song translated imperfectly into human sounds. 400 years, she murmured against his ear. 400 years I've waited without knowing I was waiting, hunted without understanding I was lonely. And now, finally, someone comes to me, knowing fully what I am and choosing me anyway. You're giving me something I didn't know I needed, proof that I'm more than hunger, even if only for this moment. The silk covered his face now, gentle as a caress, binding even his ability to speak. He could see her through the translucent threads, her beautiful, terrible face, her golden eyes bright with tears that might be real or might be another perfect imitation. She lifted him easily, spider strength in human arms, and walked into the basin. The water rose around them, cold and inexorable. It reached his chest, his neck, his chin. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice the last thing he heard clearly. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for proving that even monsters can be mourned." The water closed over his head, and in that final moment, wrapped in silk and sinking beneath Joran Falls, the woodcutter felt something he'd never expected. Peace. Not the peace of resignation, but the peace of completion, of having been seen entirely, accepted completely, chosen deliberately by someone who'd had 400 years to learn the cost of connection. The waterfall roared above him. The silk held him gentle as a lover's arms, and the last thing he saw through the threads and the water was her face. Beautiful, monstrous, lonely, grateful, watching him descend into darkness with an expression that was either love or its closest approximation. They found his body 3 days later, floating at the basin's edge. The village mourned for the man he'd been, the family he'd left behind, the normal life he'd abandoned for reasons no one could understand. His wife wept. The priest performed the proper rituals. They buried him with honors, speaking of tragedy and yokai and the dangers that lurk in beautiful places. But they didn't understand, couldn't understand, because they hadn't seen his face in death, peaceful, almost smiling, wrapped in silk threads too fine to be visible, but impossible to fully remove. The Jorogumo didn't attend his funeral, couldn't attend, being what she was. But she stood at the waterfall that day, in the mist that hid her from human eyes, and felt something new. Grief, perhaps, or as close to grief as 400 years of spider nature would permit. He had given her what he'd promised, proof that she could be chosen, memory that she was more than hunger, the knowledge that somewhere in her transformed heart she was capable of something that resembled love, even if that love required death to fully express itself. After him, she was different. Still hunted, her nature demanded it, still lured men to the falls with beauty and silk and the promise of connection they couldn't name, still drained life and pulled bodies into deep water. But she mourned each one now, understood what she was taking, carried the weight of 400 years, plus consciousness, plus the memory of one man who'd chosen doom willingly. Was she evil? Was she tragic? Was she monster or victim of her own transformation? The Tengu, watching from their mountain, had no answer. The waterfall, eternal and indifferent, offered no judgment. And the Jorogumo herself couldn't say. Only that she was what 4 centuries had made her, and consciousness had made that unbearable. And one woodcutter had made it slightly less lonely for a brief shining moment before the hunger returned. Joran Falls still stands today in the Izu Peninsula of Shizuoka Prefecture, 50 meters of water plunging down ancient stone, sending up mist that catches light in rainbow fragments, beautiful enough to draw visitors from across Japan. Tour guides tell the legends, speak of the Jorogumo who once, or perhaps still, lives in the caves beside the basin. Point out the places where men have drowned over the centuries, some by accident, some by choice, some by silk binding and spider venom working slow and sweet through blood. Some visitors laugh. Call it superstition, folklore, the kind of story every beautiful place accumulates to make itself more interesting. They take photos, wade in the basin, never once feel the threads that might be wrapping invisible around their ankles, or notice the eyes watching from the shadows where mist gathers thickest. Others feel something, a coldness that has nothing to do with water temperature, a sense of being observed by something patient and hungry and desperately lonely. They leave quickly, glancing back at the falls, wondering why beauty sometimes feels like warning. And very rarely, perhaps once a generation, perhaps less, someone comes to Joran Falls and sees her, the woman who shouldn't be there, the one with eyes too gold, smile too knowing, beauty too perfect to be entirely human. Most run. Wise ones, the village elders say, the ones who understand that some things are meant to be admired from distance, never touched, never known. But sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, one stays, drawn by loneliness that mirrors hers, hungry for connection they can't name, willing to trade ordinary life for extraordinary doom, brief meaning for long years of emptiness. And she takes them, wraps them in silk, whispers apologies and gratitude, pulls them beneath the white water while the waterfall's roar drowns their last breath. Because this is what she is, what transformation made her. Predator and lonely creature inseparable, beauty and horror wearing the same face. 400 years of spider nature overlaid with consciousness that understands but cannot change what hunger demands. The waterfall keeps falling. Water that has fallen for thousands of years will fall for thousands more, eternal as stone, indifferent as nature, washing away evidence, dissolving silk, carrying bodies downstream where they're found by villagers who shake their heads and speak of tragedy and post new warning signs that no one heeds. And in the caves beside the basin, in the shadows between water and stone, she waits. Patient as spiders are patient, hungry as only the transformed can be hungry, lonely as 400 years of solitude made unbearable by consciousness. There's a question the legend never answers, a question the Jorogumo herself probably couldn't answer if asked. After 400 years as a spider, pure instinct, pure simplicity, catching flies and spinning webs without thought or awareness, did the transformation gift her consciousness or curse her with it? As a spider, she was complete, perfect in her nature, hunting without guilt, killing without remorse, living solitary without loneliness because loneliness requires awareness of self and other, of what is versus what could be. But consciousness brought understanding, and understanding brought suffering. Suddenly she knew she was alone, knew she would always be alone, knew that her nature demanded she kill the only creatures capable of providing the connection she now craved. A spider doesn't mourn its prey, but a Jorogumo does, or tries to, or performs mourning so convincingly that even she can't tell if it's real. Is that consciousness or curse? Gift or punishment? Evolution or tragedy? The waterfall offers no answer, simply falls, eternal and indifferent. The mist rises, the silk glistens in half-light, and somewhere in the shadows, she waits for the next lonely traveler who'll mistake her beauty for salvation instead of doom. In the deep places of Japanese folklore, there are other Jorogumo, not just at Joran Falls, but scattered across the archipelago, in forests, caves, abandoned estates, anywhere a golden orb weaver might live 400 years undisturbed and transform into something more. Some are benevolent, the stories say, guard sacred pools and rescue drowning children, accept offerings at small shrines and protect villages from other, darker yokai. But most are like her, hunters wearing beautiful faces, predators who've learned to crave what they must destroy, lonely creatures made lonelier by the consciousness that lets them understand what they're missing. There's a tale from the Edo period, the story of a man named Magoroku who encountered a Jorogumo in his own home. She appeared as a beautiful woman, then as an old crone, playing tricks, spinning webs in every corner despite his efforts to drive her away with pipe smoke. When he finally realized what she was, saw the massive spider scuttling across his ceiling, he managed to drive her off permanently. He lived. He survived. He counted himself fortunate. But the story never asks what became of the Jorogumo after, where she went, whether she found another home, another victim, another 400 years of hunting and loneliness, whether being driven away by smoke and discovery hurt something in her that 4 centuries as a spider hadn't taught her could hurt. The stories focus on the men who escape, never on the creature left behind, patient and hungry and desperately alone. But at Joran Falls, the mistress of the waterfall has no such ambiguity in her legend. She doesn't leave, doesn't move to new hunting grounds. This place is hers, has been hers since before the transformation, since she was simply a spider spinning geometric perfection in the caves beside falling water. And so she stays, century after century, watching the world change around her. Villages growing into towns, towns into cities, the forest paths becoming hiking trails with safety railings and tourist information signs. Watching fashion shift, language evolve, the men who come to her changing in dress and speech, but never in the fundamental loneliness that makes them vulnerable to silk and beauty. Some nights, when the moon is full and the waterfall turns silver, visitors claim to hear music, the sound of a biwa being played with inhuman skill, notes that seem to come from the mist itself, hypnotic and beautiful and vaguely threatening. They say it's the Jorogumo, that she's learned to play to lure victims more effectively, that the music contains subtle magic, compelling listeners closer, weakening their resistance, making doom feel like devotion. But perhaps, and this is not in the traditional tales, perhaps she plays for herself, for company in the long, lonely hours between victims, for something to fill the silence that 400 years of solitude made unbearable, for the expression of feelings she has no other way to articulate. Music as mourning, beauty as apology, art created by something that shouldn't be capable of art, performed for an audience of mist and falling water and her own endlessly patient hunger. And the golden orb weaver spider, the species from which Jorogumo take their name, is remarkable even without supernatural transformation. Their webs can span several meters, engineered with mathematical precision to catch maximum prey while using minimum silk. The silk itself is stronger than steel of equivalent thickness, more elastic than nylon, capable of stopping insects traveling at high speed without breaking. female golden orb weavers are much larger than males, sometimes 10 times the size. They live solitary lives, tolerating males only briefly for mating before driving them away, or occasionally consuming them. They're patient hunters, capable of sitting motionless in the center of their webs for hours, waiting for vibrations that signal captured prey. And their eyes, multiple eyes, as all spiders have, reflect light in distinctive ways, gold-green in certain illumination, bright and alien and beautiful in their strangeness. Is it any wonder that Japanese folklore saw these spiders and imagined them transforming after 400 years into something that retained all that patience, all that solitary nature, all that golden-eyed beauty, but added human consciousness and form? The Jorogumo isn't a corruption of the spider's nature. She's its perfect expression. Hunting refined into seduction, patience elevated into eternal waiting, beauty weaponized into doom. And the loneliness, that crushing, unbearable loneliness that defines her existence after transformation, that's not supernatural curse. That's simply what happens when you give a solitary creature consciousness enough to understand what solitude means. The mist rises from Joran Falls, has risen every day for millennia, will rise for millennia more. Water molecules catching light, suspended between liquid and vapor, neither fully one thing nor the other. Like her, neither fully spider nor fully woman, neither fully monster nor fully tragic victim, neither fully predator nor fully creature seeking connection, just something that exists in the spaces between stone and water, between beauty and horror, between hunger and loneliness, between 400 years of simplicity and whatever centuries of consciousness still remain to her. The waterfall keeps falling, the silk keeps spinning, and in the shadows where mist gathers thickest, patient hands continue their work, weaving webs to catch what flies too close, spinning silk to bind what stays too long, creating beauty that serves hunger, art that enables predation, connection that requires death. This is the legend of Jorogumo. This is the story of Joran Falls. This is the tale of what happens when transformation grants consciousness but cannot change nature, when a spider learns to understand loneliness but never loses the hunger. And this is why, even now, visitors to the falls sometimes feel watched, sometimes see movement in the mist that looks almost human, sometimes hear music that seems to come from nowhere, beautiful and terrible and impossibly lonely, because she's still there, will always be there, waiting with the patience 400 years as a spider taught her, hungry with the need consciousness awakened in her, lonely in ways that human language barely has words to express, the mistress of the waterfall, the entangling bride, the woman who is not a woman, the spider who became more than spider, but couldn't become fully human, Jorogumo, forever caught in her own web of transformation, beautiful, deadly, tragic, hungry, and unbearably, eternally alone. Sleep now, listener. Let the sound of falling water carry you down into darkness. Feel the mist cool on your skin. Sense the silk, gentle, invisible, wrapping around your consciousness, pulling you deeper into rest. Dream of waterfalls that fall forever, of mist that rises eternal, of beauty that conceals danger, of hunger that wears devotion's face, of loneliness so profound it transcends species and spans centuries. Dream of golden eyes watching from shadows, of silk glistening in moonlight, of the choice between ordinary life and extraordinary doom, between safety and understanding, between living unremarkably and dying completely seen. The waterfall keeps falling. The Jorogumo keeps waiting. And you drift down into sleep like a body sinking beneath white water, peaceful, accepting, wrapped in silk-soft darkness. This is the end of the story. This is the beginning of sleep. This is the space where legend and dream intertwine like silk threads, where consciousness fades like mist dissolving, where the only sound is water falling eternal and eternal and eternal. Rest now. The Jorogumo's tale is told. The waterfall will keep falling while you sleep. And somewhere in the shadows between waking and dreaming, between human and yokai, between 400 years ago and this very moment, she waits, patient, hungry, alone, beautiful and terrible and real, forever.